recording for the State Archives and for the Marshall County Library, paid for by WCBL Radio, Shelby McCallum owner, and we're also sending a copy of the tape to the Murray State University Pogue Library of Oral History. It's our pleasure to be the guest in the home of Hatler Morgan, who is president of the Bank of Marshall County at this point, and he's recovering right now from a recent operation for well, he had open heart surgery. It's good to see you, Hatler.
Thank you, Ray. I'm feeling fine.
Would you mind telling us how old you are?
I'll be 76 years old March the 10th.
Well, you've lived past the biblical 70, and we're certainly glad you have, and we hope you have many more years yet. For the benefit of the genealogists, could you tell us anything about your particular branch of the Morgan family? I know there's J.P. Morgan, John Pierpont, and are you from that group?
I'm sure I am not. You've heard. I'm certain you've heard the song. My name is Morgan, but it ain't J.P.
Yeah.
I don't own no railroad company.
Yeah.
My Morgans. I can go back to my great grandfather. And he lived in the Weakley County, Tennessee, in Scrouge Horn District, which was really the poorest part of Weakley County so far as farmland was concerned and as far as the people were concerned. He could not read or write. My grandfather, his son, could not read or write. And
not too uncommon on the frontier.
No. But my grandfather lived on a farm, fellow by the name of Todd, who did have some education, and he encouraged my father to get an education, which he did get after he was nearly grown, before he started. But that's as far back as I know the Morgan family, and where they supposedly came from North Carolina to West Tennessee.
Mm-hmm. All right, we've satisfied perhaps our genealogists, and then there are always many who listen to these library tapes. Your dad came here as a minister of the Church of Christ, correct?
Yes. He came here for two reasons. He was a graduate of Hall Moody Institute at Martin, Tennessee. But in 1926, when he came to Benton, educational institutions had gotten to the point they did not recognize that degree. Murray State Normal School is the name of it.
That was the original name.
Original name.
Mm-hmm.
Told him that if he would come and go to school there 1 year, they would give him a degree. So he moved to Benton for two reasons: to preach and at the same time to go to school and get a degree from Murray.
Well, in that connection, there's a little sideline that I happen to know about, and perhaps you could explain. Your family was involved in more generations having degrees from Murray State than any other. At least they were the first. Is that not right?
Bill Morgan was the first third-generation graduate of Murray State. My father, of course, graduated in 1926 with the first class. I graduated in 1934, and Bill graduated then sometime maybe 49 or 50.
Did you come to Benton the same time your dad did?
Yes, I did. I was only 17 years old at that time.
And you hadn't married. And
hadn't married.
You did then marry, and could you tell us about your wife?
Well, I married Virginia Brandon, a daughter of Oscar Brandon, who was a lumberman here in Benton. Her mother was Myrtle Bearden, and I met her. I was a senior. I graduated in Benton High School. I was a senior. She was a freshman, really. But she appealed to me, and we were married in 1928, June the 21st.
And you had some children?
4 children: Billy B. Morgan, Patricia Ann Morgan, Martha K. Morgan, and Philip Hatler Morgan. 4 children, all still living in good health.
Right now, you had gone to elementary school in Tennessee. I suppose they were a whole lot similar to Marshall County schools.
Yes, they were.
We've heard about one-room country schools, and you.
I went to several one-room schools, We moved about, my father being a school teacher and a preacher, we moved about a bit. And I was in Panhandle School down near Boydsville, Kentucky at one time with Adrian Dorn, whom both of you know.
Yes, certainly do. Well, do you remember any of the...
By the way, Ray, I'd like to add this in. Adrian Doran also, while he wasn't Speaker of the House as long as many terms as I was, he was Speaker of the House of Representatives I'm talking about. Not the Church of Christ, but the legislature in Franklin.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we got Shelby's speakership in here.
I got to get that in.
That's right. And Adrian was also a minister of the Church of Christ here in Benton at one time.
Yes, he was.
I recall that he was back for the 60th anniversary this year and spoke to that effect.
Right.
Now, when you were in high school here at Benton, do you recall any of your teachers?
H.W. Wittenberg was the superintendent of school.
And another teacher was...
Elizabeth Lovett.
I believe she married Preston Ordway.
That is correct, yes.
Well, now, after you'd finished high school, how long was it before you married?
I finished high school in 1926 and married in June of 1928, so 2 years.
What did you do to earn a living?
Well, really, I didn't earn a living. I just lived. For some reason, I know not why, when we moved to Benton in 1926, in January 1st, long about the first of the year, and I started to high school here, there were only two people working in the Bank of Marshall County, Roman Trevathan and Jim Ed Cross. And they invited me to come into the bank and help them on before school and after school and on Saturdays. And then I worked there summer, maybe both summers.
Mm-hmm.
And that really is the way that I got started into banking.
Well, you've anticipated a question I might have had. So you got into banking then, really right out of high school, or even before?
Yes, even before I got out of high school, I was working in the bank.
How much has banking changed? Ask him that.
Well, how much has banking changed?
Of course, that's a difficult question to answer, but at the time I started working in the bank, we were heading up customers' ledger sheets many times and just in pencil. And just be Shelby McCallum, for instance, or Dr. Ray Mofield, with no address. We knew where they all lived, and so we were always in a hurry and didn't have much time, and each month we'd head up new sheets, send out statements, and probably you'd get a statement and all you'd have on it would just be Ray Mofield written out with a pencil. And of course all posting was done. By that time we had posting machines, but most of the work was done by hand.
I remember some of the old boroughs.
Yes, borough posting machines, they were quite an improvement.
Oh, we thought that was wonderful.
Wonderful, wonderful. But of course now it had become so complex that I was told that one bank president recently said he'd be glad when he could retire. It was just too,
well,
it was just too much for him.
Let's hold banking for a little bit more. I want to say something about your school teaching career. You finished at Murray State. Did you begin teaching then?
Immediately out of high school, I entered Murray State and stayed 2 years and got my lifetime teacher certificate, which you could get then for if you had 64 hours, I believe it was, or 2 years of work. And at that point, I married and moved to Puryear, Tennessee, and taught the 5th and 6th grades in Puryear High School for 2 years. I then moved out west of Puryear, Tennessee to near the Jones's Mill community. There was a school out there they called Center, two-teacher school, and I taught there for 4 or 5 years, until 1933 anyway. The Depression had come on, and they were not paying us anything, and I decided that I would try to go back to college and get my degree. So in 1933 and 34, my wife moved in with her mother, and I lived with my father and mother, and we swapped about, and they helped us, and I managed then to get...
It's pretty rough
5
times
kids.
then.
They were.
Much more than now, really.
Right. I had an old car, and I stayed and lived at Prairie with my father and mother most of the time, and I got other students coming from Prairie would pay me enough to buy my gas and oil and drive that old car to school and back. Of course, we'd bring our lunch or do without, and it didn't cost so much to go to school at that time. I think maybe the tuition was, for summer, I remember one summer I paid $12 for it.
Mhm.
Perhaps it's $1 an hour.
Well, even when I went to college, it was $25 a semester.
Oh, really? Well, it doubled by the time, from my time till yours.
When did you begin teaching at Benton?
After I graduated from Murray in the fall or summer of 34, that fall, Ted Chambers, T.H. Chambers, was superintendent of school, and I applied for a position in the Benton High School, and they gave it to me, and that was a highlight of my life. I still remember Raleigh Creason calling me one night after their board meeting and said, "We hired you." Well, if he'd said you'd inherited $1 million, he couldn't have
Couldn't made you any happier.
any happier. Right.
How did you come to get the debate coach's position? That's the first time I remember you. I was debating at Hardin, and you had quite a team in Rayburn Watkins and Gene Rudd, and I don't remember who else, but those were the stars, as I recall it.
I remember debating you very well because you'd always whip us and beat us and win a decision. I don't know why I inherited that job. My father had coached debating here in Benton.
Didn't he have a state championship
Yes.
team in 27?
Yes, he did. He had a state championship team in 1927. My brother Paul, attorney Albert Carnes in Paducah, whom you know. I cannot recall. I believe Newton, Renus Newton, was on that team, I believe. Howard Williams was an alternate, but I think something happened and he didn't debate. And at any rate, perhaps that history helped them to... They unloaded things on me. Mr. Chambers...
The youngest teacher
right,
does
youngest
get
teacher, yes,
many things.
yes. I got to coach a debate team, and I got to take up the money at the door for plays and ball games and any of those things. That was my duty, and I was glad to do it.
Can you, I wouldn't ask you to name your greatest debater, but just some of the better ones that you remember. Did Dewey Jones debate for you?
No, I didn't have Dear Jones. Well, I would say Rayburn Watkins was one of the top debaters.
Of course, he and I became fast friends and debated together through a career at Murray State.
At the time, Rayburn, Joe Duke was on my debating team at one time and did well.
I know he coached the team at Aurora when I was in high school.
I was trying to think of some girls that were on there, on our debating teams, but Velda Cox, and she was related to Blint Cox. She's a nephew of Blint's.
It seems to me that Winnie Ely may have...
Winnie Ely was on a debating team, you're correct. And Martha Strow was on a debating team.
Just cutting in again, if I may. I dated both of those girls. I dated...
Romeo!
I dated Mary Cox quite a while, and I dated Winnie Ely.
I didn't know he was Romeo, did you?
No.
That's years ago.
Winnie was a real intelligent girl.
Oh, well, yeah, that's
And on the debating team, she did a good job. And as you know, she came to a tragic end in an automobile accident. But she was...
Rayburn, of course, has done better than any of us, financially at least. He's now head of AIK in Kentucky, as you well know.
Bank account.
Well, maybe not.
Yes. Rayburn was an exceptionally intelligent fellow, and he was assiduous, if I can use that word. I've seen him just take the World Almanac and just read it, and it was amazing at what he would remember of just data that he would read. That the facts that he accumulated were amazing, really.
Do you recall when you finally got out of full-time teaching and went into banking full-time, or was there a period when that overlapped? Did you do both for a while? Or?
No, in 1941, the fall of 1941, I was offered, beginning the fall of 1941, I was made principal of Benton High School. And they were going to pay me $150 a month, and I thought that's as much money as I'd ever want. And I was going to be happy. But about that time, they had a change in personnel in the bank, and I was asked to come to the bank as assistant cashier at $2,000 a year. And of course, that kind of a salary was unheard of as far as I was concerned. And I couldn't turn that down because I felt like it'd be permanent.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't sure about the school teaching job. So I came to the bank. I taught school that fall for about a month, maybe 2 months, and then came on to the bank.
And that meant that you and Lohman were full-time, and were there any others by that time?
Yes, there were 3 or 4 others in the bank. I guess 5 or 6 people working in the bank at that time. TVA had come in 41, and that was boosting the economy of the county some. In fact, just after when I went to work in the bank in October 41, we were 800,000 total. And within a month, or such a matter, we hit $1 million.
$1 million?
Yeah, and that was, in fact, Mr. DeVathan was out of, I believe he was in Louisville attending Bankers Convention that fall. He knew we was getting close to $1 million. He said, if you hit $1 million, call me. So we did, so he could brag about it with the other fellow bankers up there about how large we were.
Mm-hmm. Well, could you tell us any humorous things that you might remember? I know that's putting you right on the spot, but anything you could afford to tell?
Well, there's some humorous things that I could not afford to tell. Mr. DeVathan, Lohman, and Jim Ed, and we had a vice president named Metellus Black that you fellows remember, I'm sure.
Yes.
Who was Standard Oil man. And they were all big pranksters and jokesters, and were always doing something to one another. And we had lots of fun. And, I guess one thing I think of just now was the time that Lohman bought him a sack of chicken feed and sat it over by the side of the wall to pick up, carry home with him, and that evening, and a paper sack full, and somebody took a knife and cut around the bottom of it. So
oh my.
when he got ready to go home, he grabs his sack, the bottom out of it. There were many instances like that.
Spilled all of it right there.
Another one that I recall, that we had a fellow that took care of, that cleaned up the bank by the name of Mr. Joyce. He not only, at that time our water came out of cisterns, wells. He not only bring water and put in our water cooler and ice, but he also, Dr. Faust's dental office, he also emptied all of this waste from the patients and the blood and all that thing, as a result of pulling these teeth. And these teeth, he threw that in a bucket, say. And he would take that and empty it, and then he'd draw a bucket of water and bring it and put it in the cooler. And one day Lohman said, "Whew, what in the world?" And what had happened, Mr. Joyce had gotten his buckets mixed up, and the same bucket that Dr. Faust used, he'd used to bring water and pour in our water cooler.
Oh, me. That almost hurts. Yeah. Shelby, what was it that excited you about the method of doing business at the bank when you first came here from Tennessee that I've heard you relate?
Well, Ray, I don't talk much, but it was the informality. There were no secrets. I remember one of the leading attorneys, I don't know whether Hatler did Hatler or who, he was probably former county attorney.
Farmer head of the bank.
Farmer head of the bank. He said, "Hey, am I overdrawn?" And they hollered back, said, "Yeah, $30 worth," and that sort of stuff. I don't believe in Humboldt, Tennessee. At that time, we operated quite that way. I would like to say this too. I have a silk tie on. Jim Ed Cross, who was a great friend of mine, he would take a pair of scissors and cut that tie half in two and say, "I want to see that tie up close." But I want to say this. I love Hatler. I love Benton. The Bank of Marshall County, I'm not trying to put a commercial for them, and Hatler particularly, have always been very kind and very nice to me. In fact, I can't think of they ever turning me down on a $2 loan. Really, I can't. I would like to, I don't know whether Hatler wants to talk about it tonight, but discipline in our high school was very difficult when Hatler was principal. I'd like, if he has a comment to make on that, I'd like to hear it.
We went through a period there of where it was pretty wild, and that came about as a result of the influx of people moving in working for TVA, and a number of them came from some TVA-operated schools down in Alabama or maybe Tennessee, and the TVA had initiated some schools that they felt like that they didn't need any discipline anymore, it seemed, and they had not been disciplined. Well, Mr. Chambers was a strong disciplinarian, our superintendent, and so was I. I always wanted the respect, and I never had a student that wanted to say anything that I refused to let talk if it had anything to do with class. But I wanted, then I wouldn't talk while he talked, and I wanted that same privilege. If I was going to be talking, I wanted them to listen. By the same token, when they wanted to discuss something, I'd listen. So we did have considerable problems there for a while, and it got pretty rough. The incident that Shelby mentioned with Billy Sarles a few minutes ago it was quite interesting. I'd started lunch one day, started home, and we just rung the bell, dismissed, and got out in the hallways, and the 3 or 4 large boys, including Billy Sarles, Billy walked up to me with these 3 or 4 large boys and said, "I'm going to let you whip me like you whipped my little brother this morning." Well, that was the first I knew that his little brother had been whipped. Actually, Mr. Chambers had whipped him that morning, and I knew nothing about it. Well, I looked at him, and I figured I couldn't whip all 4 of these fellows, 5, and I said, "Well, okay, Charles, come on in the office here, and if you want to whip me." And so he did. We walked on to Miss Chambers' office, and I closed the door, and he just drew back his fist and struck me. But when he did, I just took my left hand, of course, and got him by the hair of the head and pulled his head down into my stomach, and then I just took my right hand and started hitting him. And directly he said, "I've had enough." I said, "Okay, Charles." I said, "Now, Charles, you may slip up behind me and do something to me, but I don't aim for you to whip me." And we discussed the matter a few minutes, and he put out his hand. He said, "Let's be friends." I said, "Well, that makes sense to me."
Yeah.
And from that time on, Charles was this boy's name. He was the old one, I believe, Charles. From that time on, he never misbehaved in the school, as far as I know. And certainly he was as nice to me from then on as any boy I'd ever want any boy to be. I understood that after he left Benton, he may have gotten into some problems, had some problems. But there were other boys that were like that we just had to really discipline physically.
And, many of the parents may have been like my father. He used to go with me on the first day of school when there was a new teacher, and he'd say, "Now I want you to make this young man behave, and if you have to whip him, you let me know about it, and I'll really give him a good one when he gets home."
Well, that's the way my parents were too, and that's where many parents were in those years and earlier. But of course, as you know, that's changed.
Well, yes.
At this point. and I hope for the better. I'm not sure whether it is or not.
Well, perhaps there are many other things that we can come back to about Benton and Marshall County. Before we run completely out of time, however, I would like to at least ask you a little bit about some of your work with the church. Your dad was a preacher, and the church has been rather important to you, I think.
Yes, it has. At one time, my mother said to me that I can count 17 preachers, all members of the Church of Christ, in my family.
Mm-hmm.
Her husband and son-in-laws and grandsons. And so we've been close. I have been closely connected in my family. My father came out of the Baptist church. They called it the Baptist Church of Christ, I believe, way back yonder. And then late 1800s, down in Scrougehorn. My mother's people were all Methodists, so they were all religiously oriented.
Mm-hmm.
And but most of them became members of the Church of Christ.
And you serve as an elder here.
Yes, correct.
I'd like to ask you also about some of the things that are allied with that work that I think you may be very proud of, such as, well, let's say Potter's Orphans Home.
Yes, I've served on the board at Potter's Orphan Home and secretary of the board for, I believe, 28 years. I have a plaque over there that they gave me the last meeting honoring me for that. It's been very enjoyable. I've served on the board of trustees of Freed-Hardeman College for a number of years. I know not how many, but for quite a number of years. And that has been enjoyable, and I've been honored.
Well, very good. I wanted to be sure and get that in. Shelby, I believe you had something else.
Yeah, in closing, I would just like to mention that Hatler has some very distinguished offspring. Philip, of course, I guess is my favorite. I hope Bill's not listening to this program. I visited him twice in London. He is a brilliant young man. And I'm not going to degrade Philip. He is what, a major general?
No, you mean Bill.
Bill.
Bill's a brigadier general, I believe.
Brigadier general, all right. And I think your two daughters have done well.
Yes, they're both married and have done well.
All right, that's fine.
About his brother, who was president at Austin Peay.
Well, his brother at Austin Peay and I got along pretty well. We spoke, you know. He, what's he doing? He retired now?
Yes, Joe Morgan was...
I'm kidding about that, of course.
Joe Morgan was Commissioner of Education in Tennessee for a number of years, and then he became president of Austin Peay. Remained there until he retired a few years ago.
Hatler... Oh, pardon me.
Well, he now lives on a farm here in Tennessee.
We have interviewed close to 60 people. If my memory serves me right, only one grandmother and only one grandfather were of non-British, Irish, Scotch, Welsh origin of the old settlers in Marshall County. Does that surprise you?
No, it does not.
That would not apply today, I don't think.
No. Well, of course, my people were English and Irish and Scotch. That's our origin, of course. The Morgan real name is the Welsh name. But
I think he'll thank me for talking Philip out of buying a car called the Morgan car in England, which cost a fortune. And I said, you going to buy it just because its name's Morgan? And he said, yeah.
Well, he wisely decided not to buy that car.
Then the time is run out. I want to ask you the question that I always ask at the conclusion of these broadcasts. If you had your life to live over again, would you have many changes, or would you live it mostly here again in Marshall County?
Well, I'd live it here in Marshall County. I've always said this is the garden spot of the world ever since I've been here. I still believe that.
Well, don't let them give you a watch when you go back up to the bank, and we've certainly enjoyed talking with you, and we appreciate your hospitality.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shelby, and thank you, Mr. Hatler Morgan, who is now recovering from an operation in Nashville, Tennessee. He's back at home, and we're delighted to have visited with him and to hear some of his comments about his life in Marshall County. My name is Ray Mofield. We're producing this series for the Marshall County Library for the Pogue Library of Oral History at Murray State University, and for the State Archives in Frankfort. And that concludes our program for today.